Welcome back to the Nick Bartlett Show, everybody. And we are still in the midst of interviewing media and other personnel from SuperWest teams in regards to their non-conference matchups. We'll be previewing the Colorado-Nebraska game. And helping me today on the show is Brian Christopherson of 24/7 Sports. And we got an old school Big 8 matchup or a new school Big 10-12 matchup. But first off, thank you for coming on the show, Brian.
Yeah, always good to talk Nebraska CU. No love lost between the two sides, so should be a fun one.
Definitely. And I think this might actually be kind of the most notable game of kind of teams at this skill level. Obviously, it's not a Clemson, Alabama, but this is a really high profile kind of using it. Get into the questions here. What are your kind of just initial thoughts on the Matt Rule era in Nebraska? Obviously, it's been a little bit of a tough time recently, but we got a little glimpse at the end of last year. What are your initial thoughts?
There's a lot of cautious optimism about the Rule era. Husker fans are pretty excited about his track record as a college coach. When you look at how he built up Temple and then Baylor, and obviously it didn't go well for him in Carolina in the NFL. But as you guys know, I mean, sometimes guys are more fit for a certain type of game, and there's a thought that he could be an excellent college coach. He's definitely very detailed. He definitely speaks the language that Husker fans love to hear about, just physical football and kind of grinding away at a team with body blows until it's the fourth quarter and you put them down. So all that's good, of course, in the offseason. Everything is fine and dandy until you've played a game. But he definitely, I would say, has. If there were people skeptical about the hire around here when it first happened, I think he's winning them over. So we'll see how it goes.
Fair enough. Yeah, obviously this year is kind of going to be the big actual test. But so hopping over to the quarterback, we got a transfer in Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech. Ran for over 1,000 yards last year at Georgia Tech. I don't remember if they still use kind of little interesting triple option type system, so I'm not sure if that number is kind of inflated or not. But just kind of what's your initial thoughts on Jeff Sims? Obviously, winning the quarterback job kind of by transfer or kind of by default.
Yeah, he would have won it anyway, I think. Casey Thompson was the starter here last year and was still in the program when Rule arrived and through the spring. But this staff loved Jeff Sims. They'd watched every game he played at Georgia Tech. They like what's in his toolkit as a QB. And he came in December, and after the spring, I think it was sort of heading toward him probably being the guy. Thompson transfers and left no doubt that Jeff Sims is a guy. He's more of a passer first, actually, and he'll tell you that. He does have some elusiveness if he has to run, but he doesn't. I think he's not going to be a run first, QB. He's got a big arm. He was a former Elite 11 QB as a prospect, so he's one of those guys who has always sort of been thought highly of as far as just like natural traits of the position. His key will be bringing down the interception total a little bit and bringing the completion percentage up maybe 4 to 5 points from what it's been at his previous stops. And if he can do that within this offense and get an assist from the run game, they're pretty confident about what he can do. But it's a prove it year for him too, because there's some people, he's not the first talked about QB, of course, right now as far as transfers and stuff like that. So he's a little under the radar, and he'll have to show out to kind of get people, looking at his way again.
Yeah, and Nebraska is a kind of perfect place to do that. Obviously, it kind of been a rough stretch here as of recently, but if you can start winning at a historical powerhouse, your name will quickly rise. So a little bit different than some other programs out there. So are you a fan or not of, I guess you kind of talk, you said kind of maybe people around the program are a fan of it, but are you a fan of offensive coordinators, Marcus Satterfield, kind of slow it down and restore the huddle type of offense?
I think there's a lot to be said for the style of offense they're going to implement in this league. I'll just use last year as an example. Nebraska played pretty fast, and they had a game against Purdue where Trey Palmer's a wide receiver, is now in the NFL, who had like almost 300 yards. It was an incredible individual performance, but Nebraska only held the ball for like 17 minutes. and there were all these explosive plays and all this stuff, but they snapped it like 47 times or something. And I think people, not that you don't want those home run plays and you want that to be a part of your offense, but I do think people around here crave that, punch them, stomach punches, and you just keep doing it to a team in this league for 4 quarters. And then ideally by the fourth quarter, rules goals to have 75 rushing yards from the running backs in that quarter and post a shutout on defense. So it's all building up to those final 15 minutes where you kind of put teams away. And if you look at Nebraska's track record under Scott Frost, they played a lot of close games, but they couldn't finish the deal. They just didn't have like that sort of ability to have worn a team out enough where they could just put them down in the final round. So there's a hope that this style of offense and huddle, maybe the huddle goes with that. I don't know. Kind of old school though, and just like you just keep throwing your punches, and eventually it's going to matter.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting hearing you say that. Just so we're all on the same page, Trevor, and listening, there's not too much that can be said about Colorado with all the transfers. That's got to be proven on the field. But the one thing that we can kind of say is Colorado got a new offense coordinator from Kent State. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. And they're known for running a really fast-paced offense. So this game could kind of come down to a tempo. Is Nebraska going to be able to slow it down? Is Colorado going to be able to speed it up? So I think that could be one element to watch in this game for sure. Hopping back to Nebraska here, do you feel this line will be able to hold its own? You got Ben Scott transferring in from Arizona State. You got I may murder this name. You got Teddy Projaxa, left tackle with postseason honors potential. That sounded even a little terrible when I said. Hopefully, I didn't get it wrong. I'll love if it's wrong. But in all seriousness, are there any other names I should know on this line? And do you think they'll be able to hold their own against really just a bunch of transfers in Colorado?
Well, I mean, I don't want to dismiss Colorado because you don't know exactly what they bring to the table. The thing I think that people are wondering about CU is not, I don't question that Deion Sanders might not get it done over the course of a few years, but the thought is early on it could be very difficult because basically the way their roster switched over, I mean, it feels like it was spring ball and fall camp for them right now. They're like adjusting to each other, and all the new guys that just arrived. So you would hope, to your question, if you're a Nebraska fan, that they would be able to sort of flex their muscle against a group that's figuring it out and meshing in the trenches. And so that'll be a big game for this O-line. Ben Scott, who you mentioned, is a big deal. He just talked to the media today, actually, in Nebraska. He's a 310-pound center, started at ASU for multiple years, Arizona State, and has bulked up and is really excited for the challenge of like life in the Big Ten trenches. Teddy Prohaska is a guy who could factor in, but I mean, there's basically 6 guys that I think could rotate in. Nouredin Nouili is a guy people don't know a lot about because he was suspended last year, but he's a new entry at right guard and was a very good player in 2021 for Nebraska. So there is hope that this O-line, which was very inconsistent a season ago, can sort of find their step together. And interestingly enough, finishing up on the O-line, Rule only retained one coach from last year's staff, from Frost staff, and it was Donovan Rilo, the O-line coach who everybody around here thought was not going to be back because they were so inconsistent. Rule saw a lot he liked in them, and he thinks if they have a certain style of offense and Rila's technique, coaching, and stuff like that, it's going to work. So it's definitely a big storyline around here about how that O-line does under Rila in year 2.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting, keeping one coach who may have had seemingly not as much success as wanted. And you said the last name was Prohaska. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Teddy Prohaska, and he's a really talented guy, or a potential laden guy, I should say. He has like a lot of potential. He's just dealt with injuries, so he's coming back after missing the spring. And I don't know if he's going to start or not, actually, because there's like 6 guys kind of vying for 5 spots, but he's going to be important, I think. And it'll just be interesting how they kind of work that out. They're still figuring out the puzzle pieces, but a lot's going to go back to that O-line. When you think about Nebraska football when it was great, you start up front. It was just guys who knew how to maul, and they pounded on people for 4 quarters, and by the end it was sort of settled how it was going to go. So we'll see if this group can at least start trending toward that direction again.
Yeah, as a very very low youth level basketball coach, I love physical football, basketball. So I think that could be I personally like that. I should say that. I don't know if it'll result anything on the field, but I think no easy buckets is the way I phrase it. No easy yards. Fight for everything on the field. But I'm not a warrior. I'm not a warrior football player. But hopping back to Nebraska. Let's see here. Is Anthony Grant the clear-cut winner at the halfback position? I know there's kind of 3 or 4 guys who had some production last year. Any other names we should know?
No, it's not settled yet. Anthony Grant was good last year, early on, and struggled in the Big Ten. And his biggest struggle was that he's a home run hitter. He's got some lightning to his game. He can make big plays. But in the Big Ten, he struggled a little too much going east to west. He was kind of looking like to always make that big play. And so I think Gabe Ervin could be a factor there. Grant, they're working hard on getting him to be that guy who makes the most out of like those 4-yard plays. And honestly, Nick, I think it's going to come down to Nebraska needs to find that back. It's not about the 45-yard play, although those are nice in the Big Ten and what they want to do. It's about who's that guy who can churn out 4 or 5 yards, who can take a play where maybe it's a messy run and it looks like it should be 1 or 2 yards, but it ends up 2nd and 6 or 2nd and 5, and then he does it again and it's 3rd and 2. Whoever can be that back is going to be RB1. And so I don't know if it's going to be Anthony Grant, Gabe Ervin, Ramir Johnson's another name to know, but they are going to, I think, have more of a committee. At least it sort of seems that way early in fall camp.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like you got some good options though. I mean, having more than what's it like? Wasn't it like 3 of their 4 returning leading rushers, something back like that? And then kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on here, and kind of playing into what you were just saying in terms of winning down a distance, getting it to like 3rd and 2 or 2nd and 5, real what I would call probably more like NFL football. But playing in with that, is tight end Thomas Fidone as good as advertised?
Well, we're going to find out over time. Thomas Fidone was the top tight end recruit in his class. And unfortunately for him, he's only played like 3 college snaps because he suffered an ACL injury in 21 and then again in 22 to the other leg. And so he just hasn't been on the field. He's a very determined guy who I think the sky's the limit, but he just hasn't really played any college football, even though it's year 3. But of course, if you go by recruiting rankings and stuff like that, he was thought of as like one of the biggest gets Nebraska's had in recent years. So no doubt there's a lot of excitement to see him. Nate Borkercher is a walk-on turned scholarship guy that they really like, who I think is probably going to be just as much a part of it. And then sort of a wild card, we'll find out this August, I hope, is Eric Gilbert, who was a top 5 recruit in the country, 4 or 5 years ago. Started his career at LSU, had a huge first year, transferred to Georgia, was sort of getting himself right off the field, and they're waiting to see if he's going to get a waiver. The thought is he should from Nebraska's end and actually from Georgia's end. Georgia, where he transferred from, is very supportive of him and wants him, I think, to play, from what I've heard, get his chance to play. He's like an NFL type body, like a 275-pound freak at tight end, if he can get on the field this year and just sort of grow through the season. So that could be an interesting wild card for Nebraska if he's available. I don't know if he'll matter as much against Colorado or not, or if it's going to take time, if he does get to play, for him to kind of get rolling.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember probably not too much else from the interview last year, but I was interviewing a Georgia writer for the Georgia-Oregon 42-0 game last year. And I remember they were super, or he was super high on those tight end groups, all 3 of them. So getting Gilbert's, that'd be a really nice addition. And then, so I think, we talked about the offense there for a little bit. Unless there's any receiver that you really want to throw out there, I'll hop over the defense. Your call.
I mean, real quick, the guy will get, I think he'll have 60. If people play college football fantasy, I don't know how big a thing that is. I get people sometimes do it. Billy Kemp, take Billy Kemp. He caught a ton of passes at Virginia. He's like one of those 5'9", 170-pound receivers, your Wes Welker type guy who is just going to live in the middle of the defense, for 10 yards here, 8 yards there. I have a feeling he's going to rack up a lot of catches. So he would be a name I would note.
Yeah, and with Fidone drawing the attention, that might actually kind of open up a lot of things across the middle there. All right, so hopping over the defense, I've heard a couple things out of or said about new defensive coordinator Tony White. I know he's a 3-3-5 base, but basically it seems like his goal is to create chaos by any means possible. Is there some truth to
that? Yeah, I think that's right. We're still learning about it. It's sort of one of those deals where you get a vague picture of it. Basically what you said is right, chaos, but it's hard to like put it into words almost when you write about it. Like, what exactly does chaos look like and how it can vary? They play like every type of front, every type of coverage within the defense. It's basically one of those schemes where it's described as a 3-3-5, but it fluctuates by the down, like of how many down linemen you have and all this stuff, and where guys are moving. It has a rover. It basically plays with 3 safeties, is how I would describe it in simplistic terms. And it's a defense that's supposed to really thrive, I think, on playmaking and being, a turnover defense. You can make big plays and impact the game that way. So it's something Nebraska is not specialized in prior to Tony White. And interestingly enough, Tony White is the one coach that Rule really wasn't connected with from the past. And he brought him in from Syracuse because he liked him that much. And so it's kind of an interesting part of Nebraska's season, like how that defense comes along and how this coach who wasn't really connected to Rule in the past, how he does is sort of leading that side of the ball.
Maybe I've always kind of been a big believer of you need like one, just not outsider, but one person who thinks maybe a bit differently from the rest. So could be a benefit. Yeah. Hopping down here, you kind of touched on it. It kind of led me to it. What are your initial thoughts on the defense? To me, it seems kind of confusing. Just seems like they lost most of their defensive line, but they returned their top 3 tacklers. So just what are your thoughts on that?
I could be way wrong on this. I actually think if Nebraska has success in September, it'll be, if I were to just say, throw my money on one side, I'd say defense. I'd say the defense, I think, is going to carry it's more water maybe than the offense. Maybe that's not fair, but that's just a guess, because I do think there are enough experienced guys in the back end, the secondary, where that should be a strength. They did just have a safety transfer out who got suspended late in the summer, Miles Farmer, but I don't know if he was going to start anyway. And they like the back end. Quentin Newsom is an NFL cornerback. Omar Brown is a guy who has really come on as a rover. And the linebackers, they got a guy, Luke Reimer, who's 95 tackles away from being second all time on the tackles chart. And Ty Robinson's a big man up front who kind of leads the way there, that they're ready to take that next step and be kind of a game changer guy. So when you put it all together and then you consider they got a transfer from Georgia, MJ Sherman, who they really like, and some other transfers that I think can fit in, it's a side of the ball where I actually think early on they could be okay. But it's going to be one of the great mystery games around here we've seen when Nebraska steps on the field August 31st, a week before Colorado. They play at Minnesota. And we've talked about this a lot in our part of the neck of the woods. It's such an interesting, like, what are we going to see, like, with this version of Nebraska football? And it's just such a different way of doing things and a change up from the previous staff that you just don't know until you see a few games exactly what to make of some things. So right now it all sounds good, and it's just a question of if it looks it when it matters.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just a little bit, again, the standard just a little bit different, because at other schools you can kind of try some random things and, maybe have a terrible 2-10 type season and probably one of those will fly. In Nebraska, that just doesn't fly. Even though the success hasn't been there recently, it does feel that they've been close enough. Yeah, there are standards that need to be met. You can't just go to the bottom level. You basically touched on, I want to say, most of the players I was going to ask you about. Let's see if I got something else here I can throw your way. No, you pretty much got most of the players I'm going to ask you about. So pretty much just what's your most pivotal element to the defense, and kind of what do you think the strongest group is? Kind of 2-for-1 question there.
I think the secondary will be the strongest group because they just have a few returning parts I really like. Malcolm Hartzog's a really good young player who came on as a true freshman last year and shined. Quentin Newsom I mentioned. So I like the back end. The question to me is if they can get that pass rush going. Can you get that guy who's just a game wrecker for the other side? It always matters if you have that one player who steps up in the pass rush and it's 3rd down and 8 and he knows how to hunt and he can make that play or force that turnover, that strip sack, whatever it may be. And Nebraska just hasn't had enough of that in recent years. And when you think about all their 1-score losses, Nebraska's lost a turnover battle a lot. They've lost in they're not little things. Nebraska's lost field position a lot. They've played games where the other team averages 5 or 6 yards better field position because of the way they do special teams and stuff like that. So if Nebraska flipped a couple things just a notch, if they were a team that you look at the end of the year and you're like, oh, Nebraska's plus 10 in turnover margin. Or you look at their special teams and you're like, okay, they have a punter who's like, which they really love their punter, by the way. If he's like a Ray Guy finalist or something like that, that sort of stuff, honestly, is what held Nebraska back from like 2 or 3 wins probably in these 4 to 5 win seasons they've had. So if they do fix some of that, they could be a 7-win team or something. The expectations are kind of, right now, Nebraska fans get a bad rap sometimes for like everybody on the outside thinking they want it to be 1995 again. That's not what it is around here. People right now are realistic and they're saying, let's get this thing to a bowl game. 80 teams make bowl games. It's like, let's get 6-7 wins and let's start from there and build up. So that's kind of the hope for this year.
Definitely. And there's always West Coast is maybe too harsh for some West Coast people, but there's probably always some jealousy when you have a winning tradition. Again, whether it's a USC, maybe like one of the most dominant programs, or even in Nebraska going back there. I'm trying to think of another team in Miami historically. When you have a winning tradition, people are jealous. There's no other way to say it because most teams haven't won a national championship. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got in the defense here. You summed up pretty much all my questions there. Appreciate that. So hopping here to the end, just got a couple kind of football related questions and then 2 kind of random ones. So one real simple. I know it's early. Do you have just a light game prediction? You can say no. I know there's just so many moving parts.
For what?
Do you just have like a light game prediction for Nebraska, Colorado?
Nebraska, Colorado. I think Nebraska is going to lose their opener to Minnesota and win at Colorado. And my reasoning, it's not for Colorado folks who are listening. It's not a knock on what I think Deion Sanders could do there. I just think because of the overhaul, the massive overhaul that went on there this season, there's probably going to be more moving parts on their side of the fence and Nebraska's side of the fence on September 9th, where a team's trying to mesh together. So I think Nebraska will win in Boulder by, I'll say like 10 points. That would be my prediction. But, Nebraska thought they were going to win in Colorado 4 years ago under Frost and sort of launched the Frost era. And Nebraska took over the stadium. They had 60% of the crowd and led by 17 points, and they blew it and they lost in overtime. And so, Nebraska has the edge over Colorado historically, but the last 2 games have gone CU's way, and Colorado fans will let Nebraska folks know about that in a hurry. So this is a big game in that sense because these 2 sides, I would say, don't like each other, the fan bases. I mean, I think that's really fair to say. There's obviously it goes back to like Bill McCartney, Tom Osborne, and some of those late 80s, early 90s games. But about then, it started to really pick up in intensity, and I think fans of both sides haven't forgotten that.
Definitely. I'll put it this way. It feels more authentic of a rivalry than Colorado, Utah. So yeah. And so I'd say kind of similar thoughts on the game. I'll keep mine. Been rambling on here a bit. I'll keep mine pretty quick. Basically, I think that Nebraska's going to win something by like 3 to 7 points. I think that Colorado has too many moving pieces on the front, and Nebraska has at least 1 or 2 established pieces on the offensive line. So I think they're going to be able to control the tempo. And so this is really the question. And feel free if we can just keep it Nebraska today, because it's so much going on. Do you have anything else you want to add about this game, Nebraska football, or this is usually a simple question, but or the college football landscape in general?
I think the college football landscape is in a precarious time. I hope where stuff lands with teams moving to different conferences, I hope in 5 to 10 years we're not looking back at it and saying really botch this up, sort of chasing network dollars and whatever's. I know the money that's involved in Nebraska, was in this spot that some teams are in right now. When I was a younger writer covering it, moving from the Big 12 to the Big 10. And at that time, I think Nebraska sensed that the ground was about to shake a little bit, and it was going to be one of those deals where you better find yourself in a conference where there's a lot of stability and there is that paycheck coming in. So you understand why each institution is looking out for themselves and saying, I got to get a spot where I have a seat at a table where I feel like the table's not going to fall to the ground. And so that's what's going on. Everybody's doing that for themselves, but at some point we may end up looking back at it and kind of wishing for some of the stuff that was in the past and some of those rivalries that I feel like are going to be lost, and games like Nebraska, Colorado that used to be played that now are only played on occasion.
I think a lot of people feel the same way you do. I think I feel the same way you do, but I'll kind of do my best to keep it professional right now. So, but yeah, no, I hear you 100%, and hopefully, we all can remember that college football is probably about more than money. We've all had some good times with our family watching the sport. So at least I have. And so, yeah, kind of now we made it through the football stuff. One simple question and then one kind of random one that I always have to ask. This one, just do you have a favorite sport outside of football? Could be covering, watching, playing, or is it football all day, all the time?
No, I could say 4 different answers for that, and it would depend on the day. What's my favorite? Lately, golf. My dad retired recently, and so we made the rounds and have golfed some big time courses, and that's been kind of fun doing that. So I've become kind of a golf dork in the last couple of years, I would say.
That's cool, man. I know.
Let's put it this way. The other day I had a YouTube clip of an old Tiger Woods major Sunday round where he won, and afterward it switched over to one where Tiger was it was some video of him hitting shots on the golf range for 30 minutes, and I just let it play. It was like a calm app for me, listening to Tiger Woods just sweep the ball for 30 minutes. It was very comforting to my ears as I was typing my stories.
No, that's I mean, I think we don't I'll put it this way. And it was actually weird synchronicity. An airplane just kind of flew in the background, and that noise calms me down too. So yeah, just sometimes little things. And last question here. I think what you were doing may be a little nerdy. What I'm about to ask you is probably the nerdiest. I'm a huge WWE fan, wrestling fan, all levels, AEW, small levels. But bottom line, did you watch WWE as a kid, WWF back then? And do you have a favorite wrestler?
I was not as big into it as some people. So I don't want to be a poser because that's the worst kind of person. But I would say Ultimate Warrior was big to me as a kid. As big as I should say, he had some level of interest to me as a kid. So I liked him. And then as I got older, Andre the Giant, I started to be like, why did I think Andre the Giant was so bad? Because Hulk Hogan, of course, was the hero, and Andre Giant was sort of the nemesis. And then you look back and you think about Andre the Giant and just his life story, and you watch the documentaries on that guy, and I would have to say Andre the Giant would be my favorite wrestler of all time.
Definitely cool. Yeah, I know a little bit. He is quite the life story. He's some pretty cool stuff. Some appropriate for this and some not. So you have to look up yourself. But yeah, no. Appreciate the honesty. And so yeah, everybody. This has been the Nick Bartlett Show. Thank you for joining me, Brian.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so, guys, we're just all kind of wondering what's going on in college football. For today, all we can say is we both think in the spring that Nebraska is probably going to beat Colorado by 3 to 10 points. And yeah, guys, all right, everyone have a good day and let your energy speak.